Bonjour. Hi. Have a good session, everyone.
Merci, Malia. Bonjour, bonjour. Hi, everyone. So we'll start very quickly because we have like a very short time for this very important session on housing. So thank you to everyone to join us. I mean, thank you to all the participants, the speakers, but also like to the organizers of the forum. It has been like, I think, a very amazing job that has been done in a couple of weeks. So we are very impressed by like the turnaround, and also like by seeing like so many partners and friends in the room, but also in the amphitheater earlier. So it's really like a pleasure. I'm Christophe Lalande from UN Habitat. I'm leading the work on housing globally in our global headquarters in Nairobi. And it's really a pleasure to be here. I will play the role of the MC. I will moderate the overall session, so a pleasure to do that. I hope I will be à la hauteur for this role, for this session. I was asked to share some housekeeping rules. These are important because, again, we only have like 75 minutes, actually a bit less now. So I will be extremely short in my introduction. But the housekeeping rules are particularly focusing on the use of the technology, things I'm very bad about, with the Slido. There is no microphone, but there is a possibility to use this application with your phone, I understand, to answer questions that will be put online on the screen. And the first question, as a sort of icebreaker, I mean, all of you, we know many of you, are actually like very savvy professionals in the area of green buildings and housing. And we'd like to know, in your experience, what are the main barriers to ensure adequate and sustainable housing at scale? This is a very important question, not a new question, but again, will be like very interesting to have your views. And this input will be really important for us to animate the discussion online, but also like to continue discussing in the corridor after the event. I mean, from the part of the organizers, the speakers, and also from myself and from UN Habitat and our team, will be available to answer your question in these 2 days of discussion. So I will be extremely short in the introduction before like to call the first panel, but just to say that this session on housing is particularly important for us, working on housing, being the UN organization with the mandate to promote and protect the right to adequate housing. In these 2 days, we'll talk a lot about climate change, we'll talk a lot about green buildings. Of course, beyond that, we would like to emphasize that there are people living in these buildings. And from the point of view of Habitat, we think it's very important to remind ourselves that we are talking about homes. And this dimension of the right to adequate housing will be like perhaps one of the main guidelines for this discussion. So it will not only like discussing like the reduction of the carbon footprint of the housing stock, but really like thinking about or through this innovation to make the housing sector and the building sector more sustainable, more circular. How can we do not to leave behind like the 2.8 billion people worldwide already living in inadequate housing conditions? This includes like people living in the streets, the homeless persons, people living in slums, but also like people living in very poor housing conditions without access to basic services in many cities around the world. So this will be like perhaps the key issue and something we really want to flag in this hour of discussion. So we see like many challenges globally connected to the provision of green buildings and circularity in the housing sector, but these challenges also come with opportunities for solution. Many of you, actually, we are aware, have been working or are working on very innovative tools, very exciting methodology to answer these questions. And there will be like the opportunity also on the Slido to share these tools and these solutions that you are working on. This will be also like very important to animate the discussion. So I invite you to share this input. Finally, my last point, it has been like very challenging to articulate the session around two main trends that we can see. The Minister Béchu was referring to the housing stock that is yet to be built. Actually, by 2050, half of the housing stock that will exist is going to be built. And this is really like an opportunity for us to act now to make this new housing stock sustainable and circular. We have a great opportunity in some part of the world, in some countries, in some cities, to act, because there is this trend of like the construction of the new building stock. So this will be like part of like the first panel. The second panel will like more look at solution to retrofit the existing stock. We'll talk a lot about the environmental sustainability, but again, thinking of placing people at the center of the building and construction industry. It will be very interesting for us also to emphasize the cultural element of this sustainability, sustainable development. So without further ado, I will invite the first panel to come to stage, and I will give the floor to our colleagues from RIOL, Tuna, to moderate this first session that will focus on ensuring access to all, especially to the urban poor and the marginalized communities, to sustainable, affordable, and resilient housing in regions experiencing rapid growth. Now, and the speakers, you have the floor. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Christophe. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Great to see we are all alive and well. Shall I welcome the panel to take their seats, please? Thank you. Shall we give them a round of applause? Yeah, that could be helpful to sit under your pictures. So there'll be no introduction needed. But it's okay. All right, we are set. Okay, well, as we know, there is a housing crisis, and as Christophe kindly outlined, by 2030, over 3 billion, which is 40% of the world's population, will be living in inadequate housing, affecting their health, their well-being, and dignity. And as he had mentioned as well, with the building stock set to double by 2050, we can't keep doing things business as usual. The way we design, the way we locate, the way we build and operate housing, which shapes urban and economic growth and also influences lives of both present and future generations, must absolutely change. Well, at the same time, we also heard that the building and the built environment contributes to more than a third of all energy-related emissions, and the goal is to halve this number by 2050. We also heard from the plenary that according to the Global Buildings Climate Tracker, we're completely off track to achieving the 2050 targets. And finally, Natalia from the UNDRR stressed on the importance of building in the resilience. So I think this panel is super exciting for me because prior to COP and all of the work that we've been doing, it's been very important to talk about adequate housing, to talk about affordable housing, to talk about sustainable housing, and most importantly, to talk about building in the resilience. So without much further ado, I'm very happy to welcome our panel. They are representatives from the Kenya Green Building Society. We have Nasra, who is the CEO. And then we have Dr. Greg Munro from Cities Alliance. We have Mr. Roland Pearson from Habitat for Humanity International. And then we have Mr. Noel Tufani from Build Change. So I'll kick it off. Going straight to you, Greg. I know you're a little further away, but yes. So Greg, in regions experiencing rapid growth, what role can long-term strategies play in ensuring sustainability, affordability, and resilience?
Thanks. So having a strategy is a good starting point, because very often in the places where we have rapid growth, there isn't any sustainable strategy. If you look at the demographic trends from the last 70 years heading into the next 30 to 40 years, are countries in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, that are just, the population is exploding. I mean, there's at least 5 countries in Africa where the population is predicted to be 400% higher, so 4 times higher than what it is now. And 10 countries go at least 2 to 3 times higher. And if you look at the footprint, the urban footprint in some of these urban settlements, they just expand in all directions. Now, there's a city in Africa that I've been close to for many decades. And it's a city that has also expanded and just expanded and expanded. Now, where there's lack of planning and lack of strategies, that expansion also means that infrastructure doesn't expand where people are placed. And now that we have cholera in some of these cities, there's no accident. And if we have cholera in a city like Lusaka in 2024, remembering that Zambia is a middle-income country, is phenomenal. So it's absolutely imperative that we have sustainable strategies for urban expansion. And the second thing is there's a whole social dimension to this. So there's no point just having policies and procedures that we sit here in Paris and make up. It's about people. And if you look at informal settlements, and that's where so much of the growth is going to be, if you look at informal settlements and you look at the history of informal settlements, 80% of slum upgrading is done by the residents themselves. It's not done by us. It's done by the residents themselves. And if you think that we are going to collectively go in and do slum upgrading or across Africa, we are doomed to failure. So if it is citizens themselves, step one, and I'm coming to the end of my career, and I can tell you now, the first 3 priorities that I've learned in my career for issues around upgrading, there are 3 priorities. It's called land tenure, and land tenure. Those are the 3 priorities. Because people are not going to upgrade their own slums if they don't own the land. And I've had experience in Ginger in northern Uganda, where communities don't want water and they don't want electricity, because then the value of the land goes up and they get evicted. So land tenure is the most important. Second is sustainable building materials, making sustainable building and affordable building materials available to communities. And there are many dimensions to that. I mean, there's issues around microfinancing. And if we do that, we bring a multitude of populations into this battle with us on upgrading and sustainable upgrading. And then finally, something that's really, really important to us is the whole issue of urban expansion planning. And many organizations and many donors make the mistake where they slap down a piece of infrastructure. So in the Horn of Africa, there's a big road that's been built from a new port, and there's no thinking that infrastructure will attract people. And it attracts people, and what do we have? We have unsustainable, informal settlements along these corridors. So infrastructure is not bricks and mortar. Infrastructure is about the whole urban expansion planning process because it will attract people. So my last comment, it's about people, not about policies.
Fantastic. Thank you, Greg, for opening this session. I think your points are very well noted. It's about sustainable and affordable building materials, and it's about focusing on the people. This, I think, takes me straight to Roland, because obviously in order to achieve these strategies, I mean, part of the reason why we haven't achieved the strategies is because there are certain barriers. So my question to you, Roland, is what are the key barriers that impede the development of sustainable, affordable, and resilient housing, especially for urban poor and marginalized communities? And you have 3 minutes.
Thanks, Na. You can take that either way you want. But good morning, everyone. I'm really going to, I can get to 3 minutes because I'm really going to take off of part of what Greg has already said. And that is that at Habitat for Humanity, we really see 2 barriers that are critical. One is inequitable structure of markets, and the other is the lack of access to finance and many other things for the individuals that we care about. And at Habitat for Humanity, we really try and approach addressing those through a few ways, but We apply a market systems development approach to our work. We apply principles and tools of human-centered design, and that really maximizes the potential for us to help facilitate a just transition. I think on the supply side of the market, we promote and support a wide range of growing number of climate-related, what we call shelter tech companies. These are startups and scale-ups that are bringing affordable housing solutions to the market, and really helping these companies to be sustainable, viable, with a focus on not just coming up with something new and nifty. We see new and nifty every day. But you know, one motto that I've implored my team to sort of live by is, if it doesn't scale, it doesn't matter. And scaling is 100% a function of whether the poor and low-income communities that we focus on are going to take it up. And as Greg said, you have to intimately understand their motivations, their desires, their economic circumstances, et cetera. And so we may say, yeah, as Greg pointed out, you need water and electricity. They may say, yeah, I need it, but that's not my priority right now for the following reasons. And so discerning what those needs and desires are absolutely critical to figuring out which technologies, and there are plenty of technologies out there, but which ones of them are actually going to scale. I think I would also point to the fact that you know, over the next several years, 3 to 5 years, we're really going to build on the work that we've been doing in this space to try and bring to market as many as 100 of these new shelter tech companies that would have the potential to scale to the level that's necessary. Our enabling environment work really is focusing on slum upgrading and informal settlements. And we hope through multiple policy implementation activities that we'll have through our Home Equals campaign over the next 10 years, that will positively impact up to 15 million people. And then finally, on the demand side, there are many things that need to happen to increase access, but we are scaling up our financial services initiatives. In particular, we're scaling up a fund that's winding down right now, the Microbuild Fund 1, and we'll be in the market in about a year with Microbuild Fund 2. And through that, we expect at least half a million people and households, to get access to finance that will help them to build more sustainably. A lot of it self-build, a lot of it incremental, some of it new build, but all of it through a green and sustainable lens.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roland. So we've heard from Greg what the key strategies are, and we've heard from Roland what the barriers are. Now, this allows me to go next to Nasra, who is going to delve a little more into the policy. And Nasra, your question is, given your dual role as both a government representative and a Green Building Council CEO, could you tell us what actions both government and the private sector could take to ensure that the housing agenda is successful, and just not successful in terms of it being affordable and sustainable, but how do we weave in that topic of inclusivity to ensure that it's inclusive of all local communities?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Na. So firstly, just to give you context, Green Building Councils traditionally have the mandate of educating, advocating, and certifying green buildings. But the Kenya Green Building Society is not your traditional Green Building Council. One, because we quickly realized when it comes to the Global South, focusing on just buildings and not the built environment is an exclusive way of doing things and not an inclusive way of doing things. So with that in mind, then, we changed our mandate to say that we are championing sustainability, or the push for sustainability, in the built environment. Why is this important? Because the built environment is an ecosystem of opportunities and challenges that we're trying to overcome or create so that people can live better or live with dignity, but separately the government can, achieve its agenda. In the context of Kenya, relevant to this conversation, is to build resilience for the urban poor, but also ensure that we have green and resilient cities, in line with the AU agenda. And lastly, the government's key priority right now is affordable housing. And then when it comes to the private sector, of course, when you do have a thriving ecosystem, that's the only way you can really thrive. Because if people are thriving, then business can be done. When it comes to my government hat, I'm essentially an MP at the Nairobi County Government. And here really my role is to legislate so that we can push for these kind of policies to enable a market. So bringing those two together, what do I see as an opportunity? From a Green Building Council, our role is really to facilitate market transformation and collaboration. So recently, what we did was we came together with our partners Real to conduct a sustainable and affordable housing workshop, where we brought different players in the market together with the aim of highlighting what are the opportunities and what are the challenges. We realized, number one, private sector needs to be clear on what it wants when it comes to the affordable housing space. When you go to government, you don't go to lament on problems. You say, the system is not working, but these are our proposed solutions, and this is what we want from you as government. So you're very specific and you have a package. Then you go back and forth on a package, but this package needs to be very, very specific because the government gets so many questions and so many complaints. So for you, you need to come together to create a package which allows the government to move in a certain direction, preferably forward. And then, of course, on the government perspective, I think a lot of the times I've seen private sector misses the mark. When you're trying to sell a product or create a service, please start with what your government is aligned on doing. In Kenya, I can highlight 2 priorities, or 3. So number 1, green and resilient cities. Cities are ecosystems. So in cities, what we would like is to create biodiversity as a service to cities. So this is a huge opportunity for biodiversity credits to create financing. Second, building climate resilience for the urban poor means, as you think of resilience, what does that mean? It means health and sanitation. Dignity means also not just potentially owning a home, but even renting a home in a space which is habitable. And lastly, and most importantly, when it comes to affordable housing, we need to ensure we're supporting the government by creating financing opportunities, which we recently discussed with NA was, guarantee-backed financing or green guarantee-backed financing. And when we think about affordable housing, we need to be open to the fact that this might look like green and affordable in formal and informal settlements. And I think if we bring all that together, then we can create the policies that can enable both the public and private sector realm to thrive. Thank you, Na.
Thank you, Nasra, for those insightful thoughts. I would move straight to Noel. And Noel, it'd be great to get your perspectives from the social and technical innovation space of things. So Noel, how can fair and inclusive financing mechanisms be established to support sustainable, affordable, and resilient constructions in emerging markets, particularly for the urban poor and marginalized communities, taking into consideration the role of self-built in these regions?
All right, well, that's a mouthful.
In 3 minutes.
I think what's important is to realize that the solution can only be systemic. Often people focus on particular elements of the value chain, and if you don't see the entire value chain as something that you can affect, then you run the risk of having roadblocks that you may have not anticipated. And so when someone brings in an innovation, it's important that innovation always be put in place in a manner that takes into effect the entire value chain. It also means that for that to work, you need to be able to have incentives across the value chain for a variety of actors along that value chain. And of course, ultimately, what we want is a trickle effect that will benefit the informal urban settlements. But that can't happen if you only focus on the informal urban settlements. That will only happen if you affect the entire value chain. the obvious sort of main actor is government. Government has the ability to be able to contemplate the entire value chain and to propose incentives throughout that value chain. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work for a lot of reasons, and I don't want to get into this. But the ideal scenario would be this benevolent, organized, and capable government that can actually go forward and find the right incentives for every single player along the value chain. And then you have this sort of golden egg. In the absence of this, one also has to realize that at the informal settlement level, people aspire to one thing, and that is to be formal. They don't want to be informal. It's not their identity, so to speak, because they chose it. They happen to be there because along their journey, several things were broken along the value chain, and they ended up stuck there. And so how can one help people become formal quicker, better, in a way that's more resilient? Well, that's where you need technologies to be taken at scale from the top down to a certain level, from like the intermediate income stratum downwards. These need to be adopted. There needs to be enough economies of scale to bring the costs down, and also enough economies of scale to make what used to be innovations, make them mainstream. And when that becomes mainstream, then the informal will aspire to that, because that's really what they want to be. And so that's really how you bridge the gap. And so there's a lot of work, I think, that needs to be done in looking at the problem through that perspective. And I think all too often, people try to bring innovations and create innovations specifically for the informal stratum, and that becomes stigmatized. People say, oh, that's only for the poor, that's only for the this, that's only for the that. And as a result, it doesn't get traction.
Thank you, Noel. So we don't have enough time for a second round of questions, but I did spot that a few of the panel members were writing a few things on their notes. So I'll ask my final question, and if you could tie it into your final 30-second comments, that would be fantastic. So if I can come back to you, Greg. Now, in the context of attracting investment for sustainable and affordable housing projects at scale, and in your initial submission, you outlined the key strategies. What would you say is one long-term strategy that we should, policymakers in here, governments, DFIs, private sector folks, should take away as we aim to attract investment for sustainable and affordable housing projects at scale?
None of those sectors that you've mentioned have the answer on their own.
Okay.
That's number one, they don't.
Okay.
So in fact, if you put them together and you actually have stronger partnerships, you have two things. One, you get much greater knowledge and are more likely to get a solution, and you get scalability and through investment. So you've got to have a partnership between all those sectors you mentioned. That's what we really need.
Fantastic. Thank you for emphasizing the need for collaboration and stronger partnerships. That's very well noted. I'll come back to you, Roland. Now, I know you talked about the barriers, and what would you say is one tangible solution that we should take away from here to attract investment for sustainable and affordable housing projects at scale?
Yeah, tough to summarize such a complex problem with one solution that doesn't exist. So, but I would say, the Terwilliger Center for Innovation and Shelter that I lead at Habitat actually started with a premise that finance was the key to unlocking affordable housing, not just affordable housing finance, but affordable housing. I think what we found over time was that while it was the essential ingredient, it wasn't the only ingredient. So I would modify your question, or at least my answer to your question, by saying starting with finance and then moving from there into all the other elements that are necessary.
Fantastic, thank you. Before I come to you, Nasra, I'll come to you, Noel. So in the context, again, of social and technical innovation, and based on your experience, obviously working in the informal sector, what would you say is your recommendation? And Roland corrected me, there isn't one, but what would be that top one to focus on to attract investments and sustainable investments for sustainable and affordable housing projects at scale?
I think we need data. I think, and I'll go back to, I'll second what Greg said initially. It's all about the individuals in those communities. And unfortunately, they're not bankable for a lot of reasons. But one thing that we definitely can assert is if you follow a community, gather good data, and provide this data to multiple other actors, were it a financial institution, were it an insurance company, suddenly they become bankable. But for that to happen, you need someone that's able to collect the data, to narrate around that data, and to make a case for those communities. And that's something that we're missing. It would be very nice to have a sort of global database of information that isn't just what I collected and you collected, but that is actually just the same type of information collected in a way that is interchangeable, that basically people could look at that and say, all right, I know exactly what this information means, and it's comparable to another piece of information was collected in another place. And that would help tremendously these communities to be able to just make their case for being bankable and being able to receive all sorts of different layers of support.
Fantastic. Thank you, Noel. And finally, Nasra, with your governance hat on, how can governance systems empower and engage communities in an attempt to attract the needed, fair, and sustainable financing to green, resilient, affordable housing projects at scale?
Well, I'd like to say, firstly, when it comes to building climate resilience, financing could be a solution, but I think how we look at the Global South needs to change. So for the informal settlements, or the low-income populations, I don't want us to use metrics, finance as a metric. I think what we need to do is focus on resilience as the metric that will then create financing opportunities. And so if I could, propose a blueprint, it would be to make financing accessible and inclusive for formal settlements, but resilience as the metric to unlock informal settlements, so that you can have the low carbon materials utilized and then now create the benchmark for finance. Thank you.
Fantastic. Can we give our panel a round of applause, please? I think they've been absolutely fantastic. And I think in terms of my key takeaways, there's clearly the need for deeper collaboration and partnerships. In terms of solutions, we need to start with finance and bottom up the rest from there. Thank you, Noel, for your perspective on data. We need to ensure bankability, and in order to ensure that, we need that data to ensure the decisions. And finally, to you, Nasra, you obviously highlighted the need for resilience and ensuring that financing is accessible. Well, thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Na, and it's been wonderful being your moderator for today. I'll hand back to our wonderful MC. And thank you. If you could please take your seats.
Thank you very much to Na from Rio and to the speakers for the very good session and for keeping to the time. I'm inviting Bent Madsen from also a very important partner to UN Habitat, Housing Europe, to join us for this second panel that will be on the fair and inclusive decarbonization of the existing housing in mature housing systems. So Bent, I leave you the floor and to invite our speakers.
And thank you very much for inviting us, and thank you very much for the focus on housing. And it's a very fast panel today, so please take your seats while I'm talking. And the takeaways, one person in the panel, okay, 3 persons in the panel. Thank you very much. Yes, we were looking at the new production before, and now we are looking at the existing stock. And the takeaways from the previous panel, it's about people, what we are saying. It's not about profit, it's about people, so I agree very much. It's about people, that's what we are talking about today. It's about scale, to take it away from the last panel. It's about cities and resilience. I think it was 2 takeaways from Nasra. They're the keywords here. And it's about the value chain from null. We looked at the new production, and now we are looking at the existing stock. And it's a challenge, it's a big challenge to change the existing stock here. And when we look at housing, it's not just refurbishment, it's about greening, it's about lots, renovations, it's about making. So, right now. So, Jeffrey, will you take the floor? And I think it's an almost impossible question, but you know it in advance, so I will read it here. I'm happy that it's not me sitting in the panel right now. How can long-term strategies and inclusive governance framework can be designed to promote fair and inclusive retrofit, renovation, decarbonization, and do not at the same time increase inequalities, which is very important. So please take the floor, Jeffrey, and you can present yourself while you're taking the floor, because it's fast today.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. First of all, it's a real honor to be here. My name is Jeff Little. I'm from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. As a career civil servant, this is a rare treat to get to come to an international convening and meet with international colleagues. I'm at a domestically focused agency, so I don't get to do this very, very often, and I'm thrilled to be able to learn with all of you today. And I'm especially excited to do this at a time where the U.S. really is accelerating our work in decarbonization. It's an exciting moment for the United States context in this. The administration, the Biden-Harris administration, has committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by over 50% by 2030, to make zero emissions and resilient retrofits common practice by 2030. And additionally, we've committed that at least 40% of the benefits from these investments need to go to disadvantaged communities in our country. The passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which has already been mentioned a couple times, it really is a once-in-a-generation investment opportunity, creating hundreds of billion dollars, just ignore that, it's fine. Hundreds of billions of dollars for building efficiency upgrades, for solar generation, clean energy deployment, green workforce development training, creation of a national green bank, and much, much more. And at HUD, which is my agency, and I promise I'm only gonna use 2 acronyms, but that's one of them, HUD, where I work, we have a key role to play in ensuring that those investments are inclusive and that disadvantaged communities share substantially in their benefits, because providing housing for low-income households is the very core of what we do at HUD. So we can help promote inclusivity in these investments by just reaching out and working with the affordable housing properties that we already have existing relationships with. So within the Inflation Reduction Act, there's $1 billion for the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program that targets our affordable multifamily portfolio and provides grants and loans for clean energy and climate resilience upgrades. Just in the past year, we've awarded about $400 million to help over 10,000 low-income households around the country make improvements. GRRP, and that's the second acronym, the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program. It's our first program that simultaneously invests in energy efficiency, energy generation, and climate resilience strategies in multifamily housing. So we've designed it to meet property owners where they are. There are 3 different tracks within the program that are scaled according to the needs and the capacity of the owners. So the goal is to try to create some pathways that can be replicable depending on the specific situations of those properties. And we're working to ensure inclusivity in the implementation of the program, which is important not just because it's the right way to treat residents and the right way to engage them, but also because it's essential for the ongoing success and future of these types of investments. If we lose the trust and support of our resident communities, we have no hope of being able to continue to sustain this work. So we've worked to require robust resident engagement throughout every stage of the process. And this includes working with established resident councils where they exist, and creating forums for resident engagement where the councils don't exist. We are also including very strong right-to-return provisions for residents who are relocated during construction processes. They have enforceable, strong protections for the right to return and benefit from the investments. And we are designing the program to ensure that these investments don't just address resilience and energy efficiency and clean energy generation, but also will contribute to the long-term preservation and viability of the property as affordable housing. In order to ensure that the financing is replicable and sustainable in the long term, we're trying to ensure that this billion-dollar investment impacts U.S. affordable housing resilience beyond just the properties that we're investing in. So we're trying to create tools like free energy benchmarking that we are rolling out for all affordable housing in the United States. They have access to energy benchmarking now for free. We are also developing a resiliency assessment tool so that affordable housing owners can more easily assess and identify their resilience needs and try to find cost-effective investments. And we are trying to target funding at innovative and emerging approaches to do for retrofitting in affordable spaces that we can establish an evidence base for future private investment as well as insurance underwriting, financing underwriting to show the cost savings. So our goal here is that we're investing a lot of money, but we're trying to use it to get to a place where we can see this investment happening on its own without our direct investment afterwards. So that's the best I can do.
It was very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And what you're doing here, you are transforming and you're making self-perpetuating cities and communities and to attract private investments. At what you also said, at the whole family, at the whole part of the city, and try also to look at health issues, employment, and things like that. So, Prudence, it's almost the same question to you, but when you look at cooperative and social and public housing, and how can we renovate it? And we have to renovate it. We have to have greener housing stock, and how do we do it? And also to maintain the affordability.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your invitation. I would like to share with you 3 key pieces of information and one about innovation. Firstly, I would like to talk about a few figures. Social housing sector in France, it's 1 in 2 people live or lived in social housing. There are 10,200,000 tenants, 13,800,000 invested, 4,800,000 social housing units. It's estimated that between 6 and 8% of social housing stock is classified as a heat leak. Secondly, I would like to talk about our first level of commitment. Naturally, our first commitment is to incorporate the RE 2020 criteria into new social housing programs. However, there is still an issue where social housing associations are uncertain about its carbon sink. Thirdly, I would like to talk about the financing aspect. The state made the pledge to invest 1.2 billion in subsidies over 3 years to renovate social housing. A budget of 400 million in commitment authorization has been set aside for 2024. Finally, I will talk about our commitment of innovation. An innovation called Prio Reno. Prio Reno social housing is a decision support service to help social housing organizations in developing their asset management strategy. It's a new data-driven tool for priorities renovation work. This tool will help landlords to focus on more ecological projects. For me, anticipating, innovating, and financing are the 3 levels for eradicating energy precarity and making sure housing is still affordable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prudence. Thank you very much. And you also included innovation in what you are doing. And you were also talking about finance. And the European European Investment Bank. When you look at the different institutional systems of housing, and how can we make an efficient finance also to the retrofitting and to the renovation, and how can we scale it up? I think it's also an important question because, as the last panel said, it's about scale. Take the floor.
So, institutional aspects of renovation and finance. Well, it calls for an anecdote. I only have 3 minutes, so what's the better way to address the topic? Year 2010, I was starting a renovation project in Ukraine. The first thing I did, I gathered banks, and I told them, look, see, you will be financing these clients that you are not financing at this moment. These clients basically have no money. I mean, they have no profits, they have no collateral. Basically, a couple of old ladies and old men bundled together by the fact that they collectively live in a multi-family residential buildings, and you will be lending to them, and these loans will have 0 losses. I mean, there will be no single default. I remember these guys, the CEOs of biggest banks in the country, stood up and laughed. They could not believe that they will be doing this. But of course, as you can imagine, they are doing this right now. I mean, not right now because of the war, but until the war was happening, they issued more than 50 million euros of those loans. More than 5,000 buildings were renovated, and it became a normal banking product, a standard offering of the bank's portfolios. So the point is that finance is there once the institutional structure is put right. That is really the premise in residential sector. But we have to understand that these institutional systems are actually different. Here in France, and more broadly in Western Europe, when we look around ourselves and we see all these huge buildings, they typically have one owner, a public housing institution or a city. Whereas if we go to eastern part of European Union, or we go to the Balkans, we see all these huge blocks, and they actually are owned by the combination of these individual persons. Now, if we are staying in the Balkans, it may happen that each of these individual persons have an electric heater inside the building or electric-powered air conditioning unit. But if we travel to the north of this region, they will be all connected to district heating plant. Basically what it means, and actually the nature of the challenge when we think about the institutional aspect. Okay, we talk to these people here in the building to do something different, okay, to change their behavior, to install new window, do something. But what we really want to happen is that somewhere, a couple of kilometers away in a boiler house, somebody is turning the gas kind of supply valve, or is shoving less coal into that big furnace, because this is really where the emission happens. Now, how to build the link between the people here in the building and all the products we address at them, and that guy here in the boiler house to turn the thing down, this is the institutional challenge. And it basically means that you have to think about how decisions are made. Are these people actually able to take a decision? Maybe sometimes they don't. And then nothing happens. And you can put as many incentives as you want, but since they cannot take a decision, nothing will happen, actually. So ability to take a decision and motivation to take that decision is really the key aspect of the institutional question in the topic of residential energy efficiency and decarbonization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to prepare you, Gregors, in the next round, I will ask you how we can change these institutional things in the different countries.
We cannot hear you in the end, in the back. Can you speak louder?
I can try, but maybe it's also the microphone. So I will try to speak loud and clear. And now I will go to Jen. You can hear it? Yes, it's okay. The first part of the session was, in fact, very interesting. So now we are going to the cities, and when we are looking at the cities, we are talking about a housing crisis, at least in Europe. There are housing crises all over the world as well. So before, housing crisis also in Europe, financialization, and people having ordinary jobs are not able to live in the inner part of the bigger cities. And how do we make a transformation here? We have renovation, we have refurbishment, and we have greening, and then also looking at how do we have inclusive cities for everybody and affordable housing. Please take the floor. Solution in 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to come back to the 3 dimensions in your question. What and then the how. So on the why, you're absolutely right. Cities need to be at the core of the battle against both crisis and the climate crisis, because both of these crises are certainly not only urban, but they're very urban. On the housing front, as you just said, to give you a few numbers, across the OECD, buying a home in cities costs you on average 50% more than in remote regions. And even in cities like Brussels, which is some relatively affordable capitals in Europe, real median prices of apartments have actually tripled over the past 25 years. And the waiting list for social housing that we mentioned earlier has also doubled over 15 years. And these are not only low-income people, it's also an essential workers as well. In parallel, people in cities, over 2/3 of OECD cities are inhaling levels. So I was saying on the climate crisis, you know, in 2/3 of OECD cities, people are inhaling levels of particulate matter that are above the levels recommended by the WHO. We talked a lot about the share of emissions that are coming from buildings. You know, you heard 20%, 30%. In big cities like Paris, New York, Tokyo, it's actually 70%. Is that better? Sorry, so you didn't hear anything of what I said before. So I was saying the housing crisis and the climate crisis are both very urban. They're not only urban, but they're very urban, and I gave a lot of statistics that you can forget. So just coming back to the second point, which was about what cities can do about these problems, and cities themselves are doing a lot to solve both crises, to provide more affordable green homes, you know. So you have examples such as large-scale retrofits in Seoul. You have Milan, which has tried to develop Italy's first zero-carbon social housing program, for example. And we have many more examples in Helsinki, Vancouver, Tokyo, etc. And actually, cities sometimes have even more ambitious goals than national governments. So a survey that we conducted at the OECD in 2021 showed that 88% of cities and regions actually have put stricter energy efficiency standards in their building codes than at what exists at the national level. So sometimes cities are actually going even faster and in a more ambitious way than their respective national governments. But national governments also play a key role in enabling and accompanying local governments. So you just heard about what HUD is doing in the US, but we also have many examples, including in Europe. So for example, the Dutch government is trying to phase out natural gas from 1.5 million homes, and they started very local and very granular by selecting pilot neighborhoods, and then they're scaling it up to the entire country. So just to finish on the third question about how we can accelerate policy change and also fight the perception that these solutions are too costly, both financially and politically. And one way where the OECD is trying to raise awareness and to accelerate policy change is by documenting the benefits that these renovations and improvements are having across the entire supply chain and in the ecosystem, as we heard in the first panel. So for example, in Paris, a recent study by the Parisian Agency for Urbanism on 9,000 homes showed that energy renovations in social housing have helped reduce energy bills by 28% per year on average. So it means that each household is able to save up to 500 euros per year. There are also benefits in terms of health. There was a study in Japan, for example, that showed that energy efficiency renovations helped lower the blood pressure of residents thanks to better insulation. And so it means that you're going to save money on public health expenditure. Renovations also help create more jobs. You know, there was a study in the US actually that showed that investing in energy efficiency renovations in homes was creating twice as many jobs as investing in fossil fuels, for example. So there are lots of other examples that you can find in the study that we actually produced for the French government for today's Global Forum, where we conducted a global survey across the world on what different governments at all levels are doing. And so please come see me later on if you would like to know more.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much also for the examples and how do we make a dissemination of the good examples throughout the world, in fact. Jeffrey, what you said was about changing the whole neighborhood, changing the whole community, make it more resilient, and also to include more families, as I heard it in the society, to improve also, as you said, Sujin, can we improve also employment at the local family? And there is also, of course, connections to the health situation at the local level. Do you have some examples where you say, okay, here in the US, here we succeeded, that's how we want to do it, and that's what we are going to scale?
Sure. So there's a lot of the work that is going on in the U.S. and the Inflation Reduction Act, outside of HUD mostly, is really targeted at ensuring that the economic shifts that come along with these climate investments are benefiting people in an employment context. So there's a lot of workforce development work going on and things like that. I actually don't know all that much about that. I will talk about in the HUD context, we have some strong provisions in our programs to ensure that low-income residents have access to job opportunities for the investments that HUD makes. And that has been a pretty key feature for a long time at HUD that I think has been successful. We're constantly trying to improve and refine it. But it is a focus of ours that when we are investing in these communities, we are also using it as an opportunity to do direct economic enhancement for the residents of those communities.
Thank you very much. And then we are talking a little bit about funding, Gregor. So I think I will not jump a little bit between you right now. What do we in fact do? Because when you have one body, you said, okay, it's possible to provide the finance also on good terms, but when we have these institutional obstacles, how do we do? And I also want you to do you have some comments on revolving funds here? Because sometimes we use the funding from banks again and again, but we can also create revolving funds if we are looking at the very long-term picture.
Yes, I will answer your question, but I want to start with another thing. I mean, it all really boils down to the policies. Now, when do you know that your policy actually is working? I mean, in events like this, you always have a bit of a question, you know, are we talking about a systemic change that is happening, or are we just looking at few, not really important, but very cool examples of things that have been done in a cool way by somebody? Well, how do you know if your policy is actually working? It's actually a very good way. I mean, when your policy is actually working, you can hear the scream of pain of your energy suppliers, of your energy utilities. And then you know that your policy actually works. Now, on those policies, I mean, I will just ask you a question, so be prepared to answer. What is the best policy to motivate people to save energy? What do you think? Anybody? Any economist in the room? Okay, to increase tariffs. But if you do it, what you get energy poverty, right? People, especially vulnerable people, cannot easily accept increasing tariffs. If you combine it with institutional situation that they cannot really do anything to impact the energy consumption, and you just increase tariffs on them, you ask for revolution, okay? And this is the challenge that governments are facing. Now, the finance here can play a role, but it has to be delivered, and this is the answer to Ben's question, in a correct institutional arrangement, right? Finance alone will not really do the thing for you. So it's the institutional arrangement and your policies that you put in place that are preconditions to anything that may happen. And the finance is just a tool to enable this change to happen. So, of course, the energy products that banks offer to finance energy efficiency and decarbonization are simple. Typically, they are some kind of loans or loans mixed with some co-financing with grants or guarantees. Nothing really complicated in it. And these financing products are offered not only by banks, there are also other financiers. Very often they could be called revolving funds. They could be regional, national, local, public or private or cooperative institutions. There is a whole sector of those institutions there. But in the end, the finance has to be offered on a long-term basis, but the finance is repayable. So these investments have to be repaid. So you basically are asking, in the end, the people who live in those buildings pay back those loans. And energy efficiency is a good, profitable business. We know this. But we have to make sure that those that we actually are lending to are those who actually are getting the benefits from all the savings. And then they have the money to pay us back. And that's another institutional question, because this is not always the case. Actually, in many countries, social support systems work towards detriment of that. They very often subsidize more energy consumption. And actually, the more you consume, the more you benefit from the subsidies. The less you consume, the less you benefit from consuming. In those systems, nobody would voluntarily borrow to reduce the benefit they are getting. So, yeah, the finance is an interesting topic, but it's just a tool. And if this tool is applied in a wrong environment, it will not work. I mean, it's very simple. That would be my answer. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Gregors. And you mentioned the institutional difficulties, but also when you look at, when we make the investment, even in the perfect world, you have to save more on your energy bill than you pay to repay your loans. So there is also this kind of issue in the first place, and then you have all the other institutional barriers you mentioned here. And about these barriers, Prudence, when you look at the French system, I think it was very interesting. You said many interesting things, but also about innovation and how to make a dissemination of the best things in these innovation in the French housing sector, which is, as you also said, it's quite large. So it's very important to have the good solutions spread all over France and to inspire other countries.
Thank you for your question. I would like to share with you two measures. Firstly, we need a genuine European and international Marshall Plan for investment, massive in thermal renovation and social housing and affordable housing. Secondly, it's necessary to simplify and make accessible the existing support scheme of long-term investment. I believe that action must be immediate, and that its cost will be lower than the cost of inaction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurence. And you have the right incentives there to make big investments. And when we look at all the good examples, so Jin, you mentioned them, and now you have the big overview of what is going on. You mentioned different countries, various places all over the globe. When you look into it and say, okay, this is the 2 or the 3 very, very good examples. If I had the power, people should be really inspired by those 2 or those 3 examples. And they are very robust when you look into different institutional settings in the different countries, because it's all about scale, as you all have mentioned here.
So it's almost an impossible question, of course, because all countries and local contexts are different. But let me take maybe one example at the city level and one example at the national level. One example that comes to mind at the city level is Helsinki. The city of Helsinki, which put limit values on the whole carbon footprint of buildings, even 2 years ahead of the national government. And of course, that's a very courageous act to take. And at the national level, I was thinking of Italy that set up a national observatory on energy poverty, which we spoke about. And it's a pretty impressive example of horizontal coordination that brings together, several ministries. And actually, the global survey that we conducted at the request of the French government for today's forum shows that an overwhelming 93% of countries have at least 3 ministries involved in policies to decarbonize buildings. So it's not an easy task to put everyone around the table, but Italy did manage to do it. So these are just 2 examples, but there are, of course, many more. And the key is really, of course, to go very local in the sense that you have to take into account the specificities of your country and also take a step-by-step approach.
Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to read the report. I think all of us here. We are very close to the end. We are, in fact, over time. So, can you say one word, as the last panel did? They said this is the key word for what I said today. Who will start? Who dares to start? Different?
I'll go ahead. On the previous panel, Greg mentioned that it's not about policy, it's about people. And I agree with that. I just want to add, additionally, we can't undersell the execution of the policy. Like, too often, I'm faced in conversations where policymakers are like, oh, we did that, we issued that policy. And there's so much left to be done, and we need to really make sure that we're delivering. That's where we are right now in the US on the Inflation Reduction Act work, is we've got all this great stuff going on, but we haven't done it yet. We have to get it.
Thank you very much. Prudence?
First what we need European Marshall Plan. It's very necessary to. Thank you.
I see the French connection. Yeah. Sujin?
So the housing crisis and the climate crisis do not wait for each other. It's not like you can afford to fix first housing and then worry about climate, or do vice versa. And so this is why you really have to take into account the whole life cycle of carbon.
Thank you. And Gregors?
I would say my key word for this topic is that energy is not consumed by the buildings. The energy is consumed by the people.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the panel. Give them a big hand.
Well, thank you very much, Bent, for moderating the panel, and thank you very much to the excellent panelists. Before I give the floor to Madame Audrey Giral-Naples, the Deputy Head of Urban Development, Planning and Housing of the French Cooperation Development Agency, AFD, I will invite you to perhaps contribute to this Slido question, to also share, like your existing solution or tested solution to make housing more sustainable. So I'm sorry that we don't have like much time for interaction, but like this platform will help us to also interact with you after the session. So Audrey, please, I invite you to join me on the stage to share with us some insights on how development institutions such as the French Development Cooperation Agency, AFD, can support sustainable and resilient housing at scale. Audrey, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christophe, and I'm very honored to be here today with you. Thank you very much for the organization of this forum, to the Ministry of French Energetic Transition and UNEP, and thank you also to the organizers of this very insightful side event on housing. I'm very impressed to see the mobilization today on this subject, because it's a real important subject, and not always at the top of the international agenda. Just to introduce myself, I'm Audrey Guéral-Napels, and I'm the Deputy Head of Urban Development and Housing Division in the French Agency for Development. The French Agency for Development is a bilateral bank. We were the first development institution in 2017 to take the commitment to be 100% aligned on the Paris Agreement and to provide fundings with climate change impact in terms of adaptation and mitigation. And in this context, we see the building sector, the housing sector, and the construction as a cornerstone in terms of climate change. And the housing sector is also a key sector for us. We have a long-term involvement in this sector. By the past, we have been direct shareholders of social housing companies, so we know those issues very well, and we consider this sector as a key sector for the achievement of SDGs, not only SDGs 11, and for the development of, as the CDU said, sustainable cities. The question on how to scale up is, of course, an obvious question and very tough to answer, and I won't really answer it, I'm afraid, but maybe some ideas are what we think as a development bank on this subject, because this is a paradox. We see that many countries have made housing at the top of their political priority, but only a few programs manage to secure sufficient funding, and many few programs are really implemented today. We know that the population is growing faster than the production, and many countries try to massively produce, but we also know that it is very hard to massively produce and, in the same time, sustainably and affordably produce. That's a different subject. Just to be quick, 3 ideas from our side on what can we do. For us, the first step is, and the first message is, listen to the field. The solution is on the field. Dealing with housing, there is no unique model or things we can copy from countries to countries. In every context, the needs are to be understood. The land market, the cost are to be known. And of course, the urban context and the urban growth has to be taken into account. The first message for us as a DFI is to listen to the needs. The second point is to recognize, and I totally agree with what my colleague Grigors from AIB said, on the importance and the crucial role for public decision makers. And the need for us, as we see that, of strong public policies. Because it is not only about giving incentive to the private sector or fixing standards to regulate construction. What for us housing sector requires is to develop a systemic approach. By that we mean that the public sector has to monitor the needs. And someone, I think it was Bill Change, mentioned the importance of the data. So another very important point is to involve the local authority, because it's there that sustainable new neighborhood and sustainable development, urban development will happen. A third point is to create a framework of trust with the private sector. Because this is a key point. We consider that the involvement of the private sector, and I totally agreed also on what Mrs. from Kenya said about this, because for us, the involvement of the private sector is a real condition to scale up. And at least, I think the national policies have to develop a comprehensive long-term financial scheme, including grants, including soft loans, and including guarantee, and mobilizing probably also private savings. This financial framework is necessary to give visibility and security to all stakeholders to be able to invest for private sector, to be able to develop cities for local authorities to be able to provide adequate funding for housing finance bank in the sector. So that was my second point on the crucial roles of the crucial need of systemic approach. And third step or third message for us as a development bank is, of course, our role to develop adequate financial tools for adequate housing policies. In this, for this, we have also, of course, soft loans, grants available in order to finance national policies and to finance construction programs. But before that, we are convinced that it is necessary to reinforce the national policies and to prepare investments. That's why we have launched 2 years ago an initiative on housing that is called the Sustainable Housing Initiative that aim to support national policymakers and to bridge the gap between the political will and the real investment. And last but not least, we also strongly believe in the importance of mobilization and partnership and data sharing. And we are very proud we have signed a partnership with UN Habitat. Works a lot on the subject, and seeing everyone today here on this subject, I see that there is a great mobilization, but we strongly think that we have to do that all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madame Giral-Naples, for your words and for your insights. Before I give the floor to Monsieur Sapoval, Yves Laurent, but I think he left the room. Ah no, Yves Laurent. Before I give you the floor, I just wanted to thank you, but also to thank all the participants and speakers, because beyond being speakers and contributors to this session, you are all partners. I think that we are all working together on this thematic. It's very clear that no organization, no country, no city can do that alone. This is a very important endeavor, very, very important challenges. And for this very reason, Habitat has signed this groundbreaking MOU with AFD last year in the margin of our Habitat Assembly in May to work also to implement change at the country level in terms of housing policies, also working on green buildings. But in addition to that, we were also very honored to have the support from member states to adopt a new resolution on housing for all. And this first resolution, again, was groundbreaking for the mandate of UN Habitat as a UN organization to really give us the space, the platform for member states to be able to exchange, to discuss, to debate, and to promote some solution to propose solution to provide affordable housing at scale. So in this spirit, Yves Laurent, I would like to give you the floor for a few words of conclusion. And also from our side, from UN Habitat, a big thank you to you and to the government of France for organizing this session and for this specific focus on housing. As you know, it's a very, very important topic for us. I need to mention that the resolution that was adopted at the Habitat Assembly in May was supported by 2 countries, France and Kenya, but also strongly co-sponsored by many other countries, including the United States of America, Bahrain, Egypt, Pakistan, Jordan, Malaysia. So this is really a way forward to us with the strong leadership from our partners. Thank you, Yves Laurent.
Well, thank you for that. This is everybody's hungry, so few things. First, thank you to all of you, all the panelists and all you participants. It's really so rich to have you all. So the richness of the event is only depending on you. It's not depending on what we say. And we built this event for you to communicate, for you to talk to each other, for you to meet. And talking about meetings, that's a first one. I personally have two, well, let's say 3 priorities in my work. One is energy efficiency, well, buildings, let's say green buildings globally, let's say climate compatible buildings. We've been fighting with terms in the Déclaration Chaillot, so you see what I mean. Second is sustainable cities, of course, and third is housing. And in some way, housing and buildings were never meeting each other. Let's say buildings was not meeting cities neither. When I go to some meetings about cities, people don't talk about buildings. So I'm just sometimes I'm just scratching my head. What are cities made out of? So well, this is the first one. This is the first time that we speak, that we are talking all together about housing and buildings in the meantime. And this is very important. So really, this is a track to follow. This is why we have really been supportive of this resolution in UN Habitat. Thanks for all the countries that also supported it, and thanks to United States also for that. Thanks to Kenya, of course, who's been carrying it, and lots of others. We really need to make this, to get these things together. Otherwise, neither of the subjects is going to find a solution. To be true, if we think about buildings without thinking about housing, how are we going to do this? If we think about housing without thinking about buildings, how are we going to do this? So it's really the place. So this is a very important session, very dear to my heart too. So thank you, Christophe, for bridging that, for getting this together. And thank you all to continue working on that, because really neither of those two fundamental questions for the future are going to be solved if they are not solved together. Thank you.